Joe Biden, how can he stay within his constitutional parameters and not employ a unilateral mechanism to go through the debt ceiling? Because he doesn't have the constitutional authority to appropriate or to tax. That is Congress's. And he doesn't have the universal authority to have a line item veto. That's already been shown to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So he can't not do the spending that Congress has already authorized. So how does he have any constitutional standing to abide by the debt limit?
Yes. So this is the classic paper on this is a Columbia Law Review paper, was very kind of talked about in the Obama White House. Buchanan and Dorff, a paper titled "Choosing the Least Unconstitutional Option," and their framing was exactly what you're talking about. That you have this spending obligation, and spending and taxing is Congress's prerogative. You can't impound things. That's the spending power, and then on top of that, there's the 1974 Impoundment Act, because Nixon tried to arbitrarily choose what to spend and what not to spend, and Congress passed an act specifically, making sure that that isn't a possibility, or trying to rule that out. You have a certain amount of authority to issue a certain amount of Treasury securities. You have a cap on that, so you have the debt ceiling, you have your spending obligation, and you have 14th Amendment, or just Section 1, Article 8 of the Constitution. The debts must be honored. So what do you do with that? Where you can't default, where spending and taxing is prerogative of Congress, and you have this cap of the debt ceiling. And so Buchanan and Dorff's answer is break the debt ceiling. That's the least unconstitutional option, is simply ignoring the debt ceiling law. Some other people argue that you can say that the debt ceiling is simply unconstitutional itself and is an invalid statute. They have
right. There's the only constitutional there. There's nothing there's a problem insofar as that maybe the executive branch is ignoring the will of Congress in terms of the statute. But the debt ceiling, we should say, is the only one that of these directives that is not in the Constitution.
Yes.
And it could very well be contrary to the Constitution.
Yeah, so there's a constitutional obligation generally to follow statute, and so there's a debate. The only argument out of whether breaking through the debt ceiling is just affirmatively constitutional is if the debt ceiling itself is unconstitutional, would be ruled unconstitutional. The thing is that there's more financing authorities than just the debt ceiling. So the debt ceiling can be constitutional if you have alternative ways of financing spending, and thus, dealing with this potential mismatch between financing authority and spending obligation. And minting $1 trillion platinum coin is one of those financing options. They can mint $1 trillion platinum coin, deposit it at the Federal Reserve, make payments out of their bank account at the Fed, and that's the way that the debt ceiling would be consistent with the president's otherwise constitutional obligation.
Can you explain, just for folks who were not around 10 years ago when this became like a necessity to sort of develop this idea, what it is? Go ahead. The Treasury has the ability to mint money,
so the Treasury, mints coins all the time. Normally, the laws around coinage set the face value, meaning just like a penny is a penny, it's worth 1 cent. Quarter is 25 cents. $1, $1 coin, so on and so forth. Generally, the Congress is very tight with the denomination of the coins. An exception was Coinage Act in 1997, what's now in the U.S. Code section, U.S. Code section 31, section 5112K, says that it goes against that usual tradition. It says that the Treasury Secretary can direct for a platinum coin to be minted of any denomination as serves the needs of the United States. So it's completely unlimited discretion on the denomination. Now, of course, when they passed that act, they weren't thinking about these larger kind of macro budgetary questions. They wanted to just sell some commemorative coins, especially overseas. But the purpose was explicitly to get senior revenue for the United States. And they knew that they were opening the discretion. Philip Deal, the U.S. Mint director at the time, who wrote this, who co-wrote this, and then found a Republican congressman to pass the bill with him, Mike Castle. He's an advocate for minting $1 trillion coin. Says that it totally fits the original idea of why they were motivated to write the coin. They just didn't imagine this further step, which is, since it's illegal tender, you can then go deposit it at the Federal Reserve, which is our banker. The technical phrase is fiscal agent, and they have an obligation to provide us payment services, which includes accepting deposits and making payments on our behalf. So the Fed is obligated to accept this legal tender when the Treasury proffers it on deposit, and then it fills up our bank account.
What was the biggest platinum coin that they've minted in the wake of that legislation?
I'd have to check. I think maybe like $500 or something, maybe 1,000. I have to check. I don't know.
How much money do they think they were going to raise on that?
It was a penny ante thing. You're hoping. I think it's like what's thinking in terms of like the hundreds of millions.
Huh. All right. And so this authority,
it was quite successful program, very successful program. They sold a ton of them in Japan. Phil Deal knows his stuff.
Right, there it is. We raised $200 million. I mean, it seems like it seems like not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but the authority exists there. And once you put it in the Fed pays off basically, like, what does that do?
It's just like filling up your bank account. It increases the bank account. So there's the Treasury's bank account is called the Treasury General Account. It usually keeps a couple $100 billion in there. Because of the debt ceiling, it's been running down that balance, and that would fill right up, and the Treasury would then start spending out of that account. They could, if they wanted to, then go out and buy more Treasury securities back, and get some further breathing room for the debt ceiling, or they could just sit on the funds and let the money roll down in their account as the U.S. deficit spends, as it was already on track to do, the same amount. It doesn't authorize any more spending. It's just financing the spending that's already been.
But you could buy back some of the debt too with it as well, right?
Absolutely. Just like they can buy back debt right now. Some people have suggested, with interest rates a lot higher, for the Treasury to engage in a big buyback, to buy back longer maturity debt, issue shorter maturity debt, and buy themselves a little breathing room with the debt ceiling. The idea
is like we're gonna just buy a bunch of CDs. In consumer parlance, I guess, go out and get whatever percentage it. And what is the fear associated with this?
I think the fear is two things. I think the main thing is just the ridiculousness factor. It sounds ridiculous. There's nothing centrist Democrats hate more than looking foolish, even though they look really foolish right now. This type of sort of doing something unconventional, the Keynes quote about how, most people would rather fail conventionally than succeed unconventionally. There's just a sense that inherently you're going to do something ridiculous, make you look ridiculous. And even if it were actually to cut off this debt ceiling fight, that you would lose politically from the embarrassment that you did some silly thing and, made the U.S. a laughingstock.
The stupidest thing that I've heard about all of this is that this is actually like anything other, like, to the extent that there is any price to pay politically in any of this, it is completely manufactured by the people trying to avoid paying a price politically. The general population only hears that there's some type of like debt crisis in the same way that there's like a hurricane that is coming. Yeah. And the idea that like we would have an ability to sort of like we also happen to have a hurricane zapping device that can eliminate the hurricane. Yes, we reported the other day that there was a Hurricane 5 that was about to hit New Orleans, and actually we deployed the hurricane zapping device. End of story. Move on to the next story. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, it seems like, except for in some sort of a parallel universe. Like
Beltway media, centrist writers. I mean, that's the constituency that they're appealing to with this.
It's stunning. It's stunning to me.
I mean, a lot of people genuinely believe that you mint $1 trillion coin, $1 trillion platinum coin, and you deposit it at the Fed and payments start going out, and Americans will realize that money is fake and they will lose all confidence in the dollar. They will then go on a spending spurge that causes hyperinflation. I've had serious conversations. I have been in rooms with former Federal Reserve officials where this kind of conversation happens. Like the elite people who have either in the past or currently actually involved in real governmental decisions believe this kind of thing.
They also believe it kind of relative to student debt, right? Where it's like, well, if people realize that debt can just be eliminated, what does that say for other kinds of debts?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people, they genuinely, there are people who really believe this stuff who have made consequential governmental decisions in the last 30, 40 years.